we shouldn't go off of feelings because a lot of times it's just the desires with there that won't help us in the long run.
And I'm not trying to build a house on sand. You not only got to work on your life, you have to work on yourself.
Hey there, Arma here. Welcome back, guys, to How Men View Their World series. This is another addition to it. This will be group number 4. We have a short group of 2, but what matters is that they showed up today to have a great conversation and share their personal stories. So yeah, I want to thank you both for being here today once again. And yeah, so let me just start with from human to human being. How are you all feeling? How have you been enjoying this year? And before we get started with the conversations, if you have any initial thoughts going into this conversation, you can share that as well. And I'll go in the order and I'll start with Eric.
Yeah. So everything's been good. Um, just been things are changing in my life when it comes to personally, um, my relationship with God is growing, and so that's kind of something that I'm appreciative of. And the season is kind of changing. So I'm engaged now, and we're looking for places, to live once we get married. And so that whole aspect is interesting, especially leaving family. Moving out the house is a thing that I didn't expect to happen, I guess, around this age. So it's an interesting thing that, and I'm getting married pretty soon, like the next 2 months. So um, yeah, it's been an interesting year.
All right, awesome, awesome. Wish you guys well. Okay, Bo.
How old are you?
I'm
Almost.
21.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a fine year for me. It's been stable. Not too much to note, really. Nothing too bad, nothing too good.
Okay, all right, all right. So, before we get into our main discussion, I usually do this with the groups by starting off with an introduction of you both. So, I would like for you guys one by one, introduce yourselves by saying your name, your age, what country you're from. You don't have to be specific if you don't want to. And then you could share a fun fact about yourself or share something cool or share what it is that you actually do or love to do. And let's go with Eric.
Yeah. So my name is Eric White, Jr. I'm 21 years old. I'm from Texas, and yeah, I currently, I'm working more recently when it comes to things outside of work. I've been helping out at church, which has been pretty cool. And the most important thing to me really on a day to day, on a daily basis is just my walk with the Lord. Kind of defines everything else in life for me. So, um, yeah.
All right, Bo.
I'm usually called Bo, 22, living over in Washington. Uh, Most of my job is just manual labor. I work for the mail system in a warehouse.
Okay, and I'm sorry if you're okay with answering. Is it Washington State or D.C. area?
Oh, Washington State.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha.
Thank God I don't live in DC. Oh God.
Alrighty. Okay, so yeah, so let's dive into our conversation. I want to start with the idea of how men view their world. Always kind of starts with how you were raised in your upbringing, some of the things you learned in your environment growing up as a kid. So I would like for you guys to start off with your childhood, maybe share a little background of your upbringing. How were you raised? What were certain things you learned about living in your household with your parents and siblings? And maybe if you had like who was the male role model in your life? Uh, yeah, just maybe certain things that you learn, things you experience as a young boy to help raise you into the man you are today. And yeah, just go off of that. Eric?
Yeah, so I grew up in the North Texas area, so Fort Worth. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but around that area. And so, mom and dad both in life, in my life, and growing up was cool. About 6 years old is when they got divorced, which that's kind of around the area and time where I started, actually knowing things, remembering things, having memories and stuff like that. So I know that was pretty significant to I guess who or that plays a big part in who I am today. And so, both parents have a very big impact on me. So, um, that dynamic of growing up as, because they got divorced when I was young, seeing them, see, if I were to see them together as a couple, that would throw me off because, there was never that dynamic. But yeah, I have a sister who's 2 years younger than me. Me and her for, most of my life until, my other siblings were born as I got older. But yeah, more of my men influences were my dad and my uncle, my mom's brother. Him specifically played a big part in my elementary, middle school years of just kind of taking me under his wing to a certain extent. Like I kind of looked at him and, kind of took from how he was. He was more reserved, he was helpful, he was kind. And so I kind of just took from that. Um, and my dad, he was the disciplinary. He was a little more strict, definitely way more strict than my mom was. But he was there, and for, people that I lived around and just in general, that dynamic is not always there where, the dad is in the children's life. So having him has been pretty important and pretty impactful and has even affected me to, want to be a parent eventually, Lord willing. And I don't think I would have that mindset or would look at things the way I do now if he weren't in my life. So, but yeah, no. So those are the two main ones. And for myself, I'm more of the shy, reserved type of person. Um, I'm more in my head and in my mind about certain things. I'm not the most talkative. Um, I'm more of a listener. I'm more in tune with what's going on around me and discerning certain things. Um, and so, yeah, in any situation, in any event in my life, I can think back on it had less to do with me and more about the situations around me. So whether it be family fights or stuff at school, it was always it didn't necessarily always involve me. Um, so yeah, I've just kind of been just observant when it comes to certain things. And so, um, and also curious. And I think that's played a part in, a lot of my struggles and things of that nature. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, at least for childhood wise, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I had a follow up question to that about
Mhm,
your father being in your life, him
mhm.
being the male role model. What I guess what were some, like, I guess maybe certain things you guys did together where maybe there were certain things you learned from him, like maybe something that maybe he warned you about, like, watch when you do this or watch when you do that. Were there certain maybe warning signs he gave you about life, or certain things to watch out for, or what things you should do as a man, or certain things you shouldn't do as a man? Did you learn like those specific things from him?
Yeah, for sure. And not only like did he say those things, but it was also a watching him. Like I said, I was pretty observant, and so watching how he acted, whether it be with me and my sister or with my mom, or it's and not everything was positive. So
Right.
but yeah, definitely like he was very keen on us, doing being in a sense, just making sure we're on point with what we're doing and not being concerned about other things, like the things. He was very protective and very cautious about us, which has made me to be cautious in a sense, right? So we weren't really going over to friends' house and, doing all those types of things. No, we were kind of just at home. And although, I didn't get to experience those types of things, I also, as I've gotten older, haven't done anything reckless to a certain extent because there's been a lot of examples of, kids being raised and they're protected, and then they get older and they just start, wilding out. That hasn't really been the case for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
If anything, the more wild stuff has been internally within me. Um, so yeah, I think that's been pretty important. I think, when it comes to respecting and having integrity, um, has been a thing that he's been big on. Um, being honest, being truthful. I struggled a lot growing up with lying to him because I was so nervous about what would happen. Um, and it took me a while to kind of understand, but now that I'm older, I understand the value of being honest and being truthful. And a lot of the times I was just so scared because of how strict he was. Um, but now over time and, having a relationship with God, I realized that, um, how important it is to be truthful, regardless of like the consequences of what you've done. And I think, um, I was always nervous about being disciplined, but I don't think discipline is necessarily a bad thing. And now the how extreme and all that, we can debate on that all we want, but I think discipline is important, because when a kid or when anybody lacks discipline, and hasn't been disciplined, they could be a lot more reckless. And so that's something that he was big on as well as discipline. And, he was a kid too, so he got away with a little more than we did. But I think because he knew that he got away with a lot more when he was a kid, that kind of made him a little different as a parent. At least in his older years, as he was in high school, middle school, he got away with a little more. And so with us, he was just kind of on top of us, which was kind of burdening at times, but at the same time, I think it has been helpful in a sense. So yeah.
All right, interesting. All right, Bo.
So I grew up mostly an only child, though I do have a good amount of brothers now. Grew up extremely poor. Like by the time I was able to remember things, probably yeah, around 6, I lived in like a little mobile home, I believe. I lived there for a few years. Mom and dad separated. So I was mostly living with my mom, but I flipped back between there, moved schools a lot. I ended up learning a lot of kind of independence and what do you call it? Being able to kind of live with yourself without like frequently talking to other people. Like a lot of people go crazy because of the silence. Especially if you're a very social person, but I can be social and I can chill out when no one's around for good amount of time. I ended up going a lot into video games. My father was a pretty big role in my life, even though he was around a good amount. Well, when I was allowed to come over to where he was, I'd say he tried to make sure I didn't do, drugs or anything bad, but I was never interested in most of that anyway. So he tried to make sure I was on the right track, but I was generally there anyway. Uh, let's. Mm, I've been decent at like kind of looking at patterns throughout my life and like looking at other people and trying to steer my way from good and bad things I've kind of perceived them doing. Like I've seen a lot of the ways my family has done things and the ways it's gone bad or good, and trying to emulate or avoid things, kind of looking through that.
Right, right. And
So,
yeah, and how
yeah.
just a follow up questions to that what you just mentioned. Like how did it make you feel knowing you had to kind of teach some certain things that maybe your parents didn't teach you? Were you kind of like, oh man, like, oh, I got to learn all of this. This is kind of overwhelming. Or were you kind of like, it's whatever. I'll just go with the flow and take one step at a time?
Yeah, a lot of my life can come down to it's really easy to do things when you just view them as something you have to do. Like what's it called? I don't buy, like, I don't have a car, but I still have a job because I live close enough. Like I don't need a car because I live close enough to my job.
Right, right.
I could get a car. I wouldn't, use it for anything. Like I even get groceries by walking. So it's just whatever you view as something you need to do or something that you don't have an option to do otherwise,
Hmm.
then it's much easier to do it. Like I could go buy a car, or I could save money doing it the way I'm doing.
Right. And how did it you mentioned about when you did get the opportunity to visit your father, like what were like some specific things you guys did together, like where you had that father and son bond, like I guess if you're okay with sharing, like what were some specific things he taught you? And same question, like I said for Eric, certain things that he taught you, like hey, you do this, as a man you want to kind of do this, but as a man you kind of want to stay away from doing this.
The funniest thing is I'm basically just a clone of my dad. So nearly anything he tried to teach me was something I already had experienced. So we didn't hang around a whole lot. Like we did father and son bonding occasionally, but we were always so similar to each other that we just had that bond from the set.
Okay, nice, nice. Okay, and so now I'm gonna ask you guys both this question. What were I kind of hinted at this, but what were some things you guys couldn't do as a child, and then what were some things were expected of you? And I know you guys kind of briefly talked about that, but if you want to elaborate or share a different perspective, you can. Okay, Eric.
I don't know. Like I said, earlier, wasn't big about being able to hang or spend time with friends outside of school or things like that, or even meet people, which wasn't even my personality anyway. So it wasn't too like I wasn't too like upset about those types of things. Um, but yeah, yeah, that type of stuff. Um, there wasn't too much we couldn't do. Um, that I can remember at this moment. Because I know, when I was at my dad's house, it was more just me, him, and my sister. And then at my mom's house, we had family living with us as well. So that dynamic was different, right? We were more in the house with my dad than we were with my mom. When I was at my mom's, we would go outside and play with friends. But at my dad's, it was a little different. Um, but yeah, so that type of stuff. He was pretty strict. And so like there would be times where, we would do something, and then that's punishment, or, you get whooped, or, something, gets taken away from you, which looking back, at that time it felt extreme. And there were moments where it was, but, have a better understanding of it now. Um, but as a person who was shy and reserved, there wasn't too much that I just wanted to do that was just outright crazy or something that they would forbid me to do. So yeah.
Okay. All right, Bo.
Mm, when I was at my father's house, I wasn't near anybody I knew, so I just kind of stayed inside, did nothing. When I was with my mother, I could do just about anything because I never gotten anything, into any trouble or anything. So the railings there basically didn't exist. If I wanted to go to a friend's house, I'd have to notify her, but she'd never say no. I could, yeah, no, I wouldn't really say I was restricted in nearly anywhere.
Like being a child, right? What did you notice how girls were being treated differently compared to how you guys were being treated as boys? Did you feel like maybe girls got treated differently, or they had they had I guess they were more your maybe your parents, or maybe whether it's in school, maybe teachers were more lenient towards girl classmates or your sisters being at home. How was it? What was it? Pretty much the same, or there was a difference between how uh, boys and girls were treated? Eric.
Yeah, so what's interesting about that, I'm the oldest. It was me and my sister for a while, and then my dad and my mom both had kids separately with two different people. Um, so I have my sister, and then I have a younger brother and a younger sister that are around the same age. Um, but when it comes to me and my sister growing up, it was just me and her mostly until, middle school. Um, but yeah, she would always say that I was the favorite. Um, and I don't know if that's necessarily what it was. I think I was just a lot less trouble than she was. So there wasn't really like, I mean, obviously there's certain stipulations like, like when we would argue or, my dad was definitely not big on, putting your hands on a woman. Like that was not his thing at all. I know like me and my sister used to like get into it when we were younger, and that most of that stuff would happen at my mom's, but that was like a no tolerance thing when it came to my dad. So stuff like that, of course, which I guess is not, of course, everywhere, but I know for in the family I grew up in, that was a for sure thing, like no tolerance on that. Um, but yeah, I mean, she was the youngest, so I think being the youngest and being a girl, she had some more leeways than I did, but I think honestly, there wasn't too much of a difference because I was a lot less trouble. And then at school, I feel like it was kind of the same. I don't really remember too much. I mean, we had mostly women teachers, so I mean that bond with women teachers and girls was always there. But the type of person I wasn't like a bad kid. I was, if anything, I wasn't bad in front of the teacher's eyes, but like I was kind of sneaky when I did stuff. Like I wasn't the kid that got in trouble at school for fighting or doing something they weren't supposed to. I would get in trouble by my dad for not, having good grades, but I would kind of be sneaky and get away with certain stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think there was too much of a difference on either side, honestly.
Okay, all right, Bo.
You know, a good amount of women that I knew were those kind of bigger Samoan type of women that kind of, uh, best words I can think of is act more masculine. So there wasn't a huge difference
Mm,
in that. Like I remember playing like even doing we like male versus female tug of war, stuff like that in middle school.
okay, okay.
Yeah, we got destroyed. It was so many Samoan women and then like a bunch of small white boys
Okay,
got
that's
murdered out.
okay. That's interesting. So where you live, the demographic was more like I guess you said Samoan.
Yeah, I don't exactly know why, but most areas I go into, a lot of Samoan people. Like even my job, a lot of Samoan people.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's transition to like when as a child, when do you guys start liking girls? And like how has your thoughts and attitude changed about girls when you were younger as a boy compared to now being older as a man? How do you view females or just women in general now? So what's that comparison to when you were younger to now when you're older, seeing things differently? Eric?
Yeah, so I think the first girl that I liked was around third, fourth grade. And she was the first girl I actually told that I liked. And, you know, back then, you don't really know much. My dad really didn't talk to me about that type of stuff. Most of the time, I was learning stuff about relationships and stuff from the shows I watched. So like Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, all that type of stuff, movies. So a lot of the stuff that I was learning back then, um, was from those types of things, right? So, um, yeah, like I remember that girl specifically. I remember when I told her that I liked her. It was in a PE class, and I remember her and I guess her friends were like kind of laughing at me. And I think that's looking back, I know that's the where the trauma, I guess you would say, started when it comes to like telling someone I like them, or like I think broader is being rejected. And so I was scared of rejection. But for some reason, I still liked that girl for the entirety of elementary after that, but just never really said it. Um, and my perspective on women has kind of changed over the years because for a lot of time, growing up, you watch these movies or shows and I mention those, because that was what was really impacting me. Like my mom really was in relationships, but I didn't really see him. My dad, there was this one lady that he was with for like a little short spell, and then he met my stepmom a little bit, I think in fifth grade. But for some, I never really looked at their relationships and kind of took from them. And if I did, it was subconsciously, but it was more so with the things that I watched and the things that I saw and the things that I read. Um, and so, my whole thing was, look, I was never taught, to get to know somebody and get to know their personalities. I actually remember a girl liking me in sixth grade, going into seventh, and I was friends with this girl for years, and because I didn't, I guess, because she wasn't the best looking, I guess I I kind of like was felt like I was scared of being like judged. But me and her had a really like good actual friendship, and like I really liked her personality and all that. Um, but I let that fear of being judged because she wasn't the prettiest girl define. So that was something that I struggled with for years, and I feel like nothing ever worked out because I was always going in with that, like putting these girls on pedestals. Like it happened in elementary and middle school, high school. And so it happened for a while until about 2 years ago, it happened again with somebody that I worked with. But I actually started to get to know this girl, right? So I'd never been in a relationship. Um, and I usually just liked girls, never told them, would get hurt. If I did tell them, I would, get hurt or whatever. Um, but this girl, I got to know her, and at this time, I'm starting to believe in, starting to believe in God and become a Christian and believe in Jesus. And so, my perspective is changing, but there's still that, and what I come to find out more is really like a lust thing. Um, and so it's kind of like I felt like God kind of put me in uh this particular relationship to show me like, okay, this is how destructive and how bad it can be for you doing this type of thing, right? So I get to know this girl. We don't talk as in like in a relationship, but we do get to know each other. Um, and I remember she liking this guy, and I kind of already knew before I even told her that I was interested. And before I even knew who he was, and then I found out that he did like her, and she was kind of like, he's just a friend or whatever. And it turned out that she liked him as well. And it was just kind of, but she enjoyed our friendship, but she didn't see me in that way. And we had this friendship, and I was sharing what I believed, but at the same time being hypocritical and was more concerned about what I wanted and viewing her in the way I did. I put her on this pedestal, and that just kind of messed me up a lot, and to the point where they started dating, and she felt like it wasn't good for us to be talking or to be friends and be in that relationship, and I liked her. So then some time passes, we reconcile for like a month, and then because I think I reached out, but then I just couldn't get past wanting to, and she was kind of on and off with the guy, but I still wasn't past, wanting to be more. And so then we stopped talking for like 5 months. And then God kind of did a work on me and kind of changed my perspective on things. And um, over time. And so finally, I kind of prayed on it. I reached out to her, and we kind of mended our friendship. Um, and so everything was good, and I had a different perspective. Well, the month after, or the same month that I mended that friendship with her, I met my now fiance at church. And the way I met my fiance and the way that I would, see these girls prior to her were, the girls prior to her, it was just a lust thing. It was just how they looked. I met my fiance. I saw her once before, but I met her in a small group at church. And it was what we were talking about, the conversation we were having, with me and her and the rest of the group. And what caught my attention was what she said about a certain topic. It wasn't how she looked. It was just that in particular at the time. And then over time, we got to know each other. And it felt like God was with that relationship. And I don't think it has to do with, I'm grateful that it played out the way that it does, but it could have been anywhere else. It could have been outside of church, but if it was, his will to happen, then I'm sure it would have worked out, regardless. But I think my perspective has changed in a way where I kind of submitted all my wants and desires to him. When it comes to that, there's this verse in the book of Matthew where it says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." And when he says these things, he means like these things that we feel that we need, which we really don't. We need him first, and then the rest of it, don't worry about the rest of it. He has it under control. Um, and that's Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. Um, but yeah, so my perspective has changed with the idea of lusting after girls and kind of putting them on this pedestal to kind of being changed by God to see that, what he desires and what he wills, and that what's in a person means more than what's on the outside. And um, the desires and wants of our flesh, so to speak, isn't necessarily always the best for us. We shouldn't always we shouldn't go off of feeling, because a lot of times it's just the desires within that we don't necessarily, that won't help us in the long run. So yeah, I think that's how my perspective has changed when it comes to liking people, women in particular.
Right. Awesome, awesome. Okay, Bo.
Uh, yeah, it was probably around middle school, late middle school, where I had my first attraction. But I've never been too interested in pursuing it, like for most of my life. Like I'll be attracted to this person or that person, but I've always kind of been more focusing on myself before trying to build up my life before pursuing a lot of it. I've dated before, but it never panned out too well. Um, never like a bad breakup or anything, but uh, what do you call it? It's mostly because of, or at least what I assume is mostly because of somewhat latent trauma. Because man, my entire family, bar, and I have a big family. At least the entire family that I know, bar like maybe three of them are all in like either were, are, half and half, just terrible relationships, divorces, child support, violent breakups. So, and a lot of it happened pretty early on, a lot of mistakes. So I just eventually took the stance of if I find the right person, person I feel that's right, I'd pursue it. But if it's just typical attraction, I'll more than likely just pass it off. I know eventually I'll get over it regardless.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that. I definitely could relate to that. So so like the trauma that you've seen like from your family or friends, a lot of that kind of like, in a way, uh, made you want to focus on, making yourself, like, fulfilling your purpose first before even getting into a relationship or looking for someone, because you kind of see the negative, the dark side of humanity, where it's like, I've seen all this crazy stuff, and it's like, I do not want to, keep the cycle going. Is that kind of your
Yeah, yeah. I'm
framework?
not. I'm not. Yeah, I'm. My whole thing. I'm not trying to build a house on sand. I'm
Ah,
trying to
right.
make a nice bedrock before I kind of, you not only got to work on your life, you have to work on yourself. It's not just, oh, I need enough money, I need this, I need that. But it's just, building yourself up until you feel like maybe it's maturity, maybe it's this, maybe it's that about yourself.
Right, definitely, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great approach. I mean, especially with how interesting this world has become today. I think I think it's best.
Yeah.
A lot of people try to focus on them spiritually the best way they can. But I digress. So let's go into our next topic here, which will fall into gender roles in our society today. So I want to ask you both, in your opinion, how is a man's role in society different from a woman's role in today's society? And I'll start with Eric.
Yeah, I think it varies. I think I think our society has changed so much, and it's constantly changing. Like this isn't, I don't think. Yes, we're in a new day, but change has been since the beginning. And I don't know. I think you know there's um there's a big emphasis on money, money, money. And the male is usually the one who's providing, but now we're getting into a certain circumstances where it's half and half, or there's a percentage on each end. Um, but yeah, I think it's that, but then there's a lot of relationships, like in the role of a man, where it's kind of like just provide and that's it. And there's a lack of leadership, and even though a man can say, I'm the head of the house, or this is my house, stuff like that. I feel like there's a lack of leadership, a lack of um, guidance for not only you know kids if they have them, but the relationship of a husband and wife. Um, and then sometimes it's not even that. Um, there's a lot of undealt with trauma and things like that, and um, yeah, I think it's just kind of like get rich. And I know that's not everybody's perspective. Um, but I think it's a lot of self-seeking. Um, and not all of it, but I think people's motives are kind of skewed in a sense. At least what I see in society mostly, or what's presented. I know in every case it's not that way. There's people who love their families, put things a priority over, or put things that are more important than the things of this world, right? Who where there's an emphasis on, I know for me personally, having a relationship with God, and that being not only just between you and God, but making sure that's a part of the household as well. But I think what's more promoted and what's more seen is kind of self-seeking thing when it comes to the man role, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily like let's say a man is on his own, living on his own, doesn't have a wife or doesn't have a girlfriend or doesn't have kids. Um, even that, like I think, especially in, or not especially, but I think it's more it's more common to be more self-seeking, um, and desiring whatever. you're pursuing more than, I guess, being there for others, caring for others, loving others. Um, so yeah, I think it's a lot of, I won't say this is for every man, but I feel like it's a lot of selfishness, whether they have family, whether they don't, whether they have kids, whether they don't, whether they're in a marriage or a relationship. I feel like it's more of a self-seeking thing. I don't think that's just the man thing, but I think the man, let's say if they do have a family, that role is pretty important. And I think there's a lot of, relationships that happen and then, fathers aren't involved, or, that stuff affects our society, in a big way. And I don't think people realize that. I don't think people realize the relationships that they have, how that affects not only them, but the generations to come. So yeah, I know I kind of went all over, but that's kind of how my mind is kind of all over when it comes to that question. So yeah.
Right, right. All right, Bo.
I wouldn't really, it's pretty well put. I wouldn't say there's anything I really disagreed with. I covered most of my point of view too. I would definitely say that a lot of men nowadays view themselves as the provider and they need to have this and need to have that in every scenario. It's becoming, like selfishness and worse of that is just because, the crazy stuff happening in the world. Like there's not really any country that's doing well right now. And the worse it gets, the farther stuff like this will spread. This is just one of the other negative aspects that come of the kind of economies going down. Like, I mean, I have a federal job. I couldn't live in the area I work if I lived by myself. Like, there's a lot of people struggling now, a lot more than, 80 years ago or any of that.
Gotcha,
You
gotcha.
know, it, yeah, 80 years ago, if you thought you were the provider and you wanted to be, that was perfectly fine because you could do that off of, a job. Nowadays, it kind of becomes a lot more murky.
Right, right. Okay. So, what do you guys think are some misconceptions about men that women may or may not know? Eric?
I think and some of it can be men's fault, but the emotion, I think, or how emotional we can be, um, whether we show it or we don't. Um, I think our emotions flare a lot. Um, but I think we're just we can be like, well, I wouldn't say like them because not every woman is, super emotional either. But I don't know. I think there's a lack of understanding when it comes to men, like, how they feel about certain things. And I know at times men can be hard, they can't always express certain things, but you know, I think what's interesting and what comes to mind is the fact that men care. Um, Now, where their desires and where their headspace is at, it can vary. So there could be some selfishness, but then you got to ask the question, okay, why are they being selfish? Where does that stem from? Um, I think people in general, have this misconception of or not being able to understand people, right? And instead of seeking to understand, it's just judge, judge, judge. And so I feel like that's a misconception. I think that's seen a lot where men don't care, or um, men don't. Um, I guess Men don't care. Men don't. May not appreciate women or see women as object, which I know that's a struggle for a lot of men, including myself at times. Um, but I think there is a deep care, and like I said, I think it's that understanding. Where does that trauma stem from, right? Like we weren't, when we were babies and we were young kids, our mind didn't go to objectifying women or looking at women in a certain way, right? It stems from something. And so I think I think that's important, you know, because I myself struggle, have struggled with it, still struggle with it, at points and times, right? And it stems deeper than what is seen, right? Like it's just not a simple like, oh, he's only cares about this or that, and doesn't really care about me. Um, I think that perspective is wrong. I think how we're raised makes us the way we are, how we see society growing up, and the traumas and the experiences we go through. Um, and so yeah, I think that's important. I think, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's just that men care. I think that there's a misconception of that. I think that men care, and that um, if, if women could be more understanding, and I know not every person is going to be open. Every man, not every man is going to be open and honest and truthful about certain things. But I think a willing to be understanding and to give men that space, I think that would help a lot of the issues that go on today, not just in relationships, but just in general. I think um, friendships, relationships, um, all of those things, even, at work or um, just in any area. I think that's important, just being understanding. And I think there's at least, where I grow up in, I don't know if this everywhere, but I know where I grew up, there's a misconception, and it's quick to judge a man for not being, you know, vulnerable. And I think it's hard, to be vulnerable, especially how, you know, like I said, we're raised, what we see, how we're treated. Um, I know I was way more lighthearted when I was younger, and way more emotional, way more vulnerable when I was younger compared to now. Like I feel like in a way, and I think I'm coming out of it I feel like I've been coming out of it more in these last couple of years, but there's still those moments where I'm kind of hardened and just kind of like, I know, it happens with my fiance, and I kind of learned what the terminology is with going to counseling, stonewalling, where I'm just like, I'm good, I'm good, I don't want to talk about it, I'm good, and I just kind of say that I'm good. And it's not just with her, that's been a thing for a lot of my life, that, I kind of just bottle stuff inside because I don't feel like somebody will understand. And not only that, I don't feel like especially growing up, I didn't feel like I ever got that space. And then when I did, I was so emotional that I don't think I was able to get it out the way that I wanted to. So yeah.
All right. Okay, nice. Bo?
Yeah, we're definitely taught a kind of, almost call it toxic stoicism of just bearing any burden. Well, it's not really talk or taught. You kind of account it to like the male role throughout, the many, many years of it's usually our role has kind of just been taking any burden, whether it be bringing back the food, growing the crops, hunting, any of that. So you could say it goes like nearly all the way back to the beginning of how a lot of this stonewalling can appear. Kind of I like to call it just monkey brain. I do think a lot of things can come down to monkey brain too, like a lot of things are instincts in people, like objectifying women, for instance. That's more or less one of the things we just carried over from monkey brain. It's another instinct to fight, of course, but that being more propensive to anger, like women can say some things are down to hormones because periods. We don't have anything like that, but we still have hormones that will affect us in certain ways. I think that's not brought up very often.
Okay. And when you say like as far as male hormones, can you kind of maybe elaborate on that?
Um, well, Male hormones, like, we have a lot more testosterone, which can do certain things to your mood. Like, part of the extra aggression can be somewhat like linked to the extra testosterone. And
Gotcha.
yeah, in like certain circumstances, you can build more testosterone less, especially if you're in an aggravating situation. You're more likely to, I believe, produce adrenaline. Like if you're in an argument, you're getting angrier than other people, possibly just because you have more testosterone, more of the fight or flight is going into your body.
Ah, okay, I see. Interesting. Yeah. All right. Um, Based on what you also said too, Bo, about testosterone, male hormones, uh, this would kind of go in addition with what you just said. But I want to ask you guys: do you believe men's mental health problems go unseen? Why or why not, Eric?
Yeah, I think they do in a certain extent, and I think it goes back to like just not wanting to open up and be vulnerable. Um, but like I said, I also don't think that a lot of men are given that space to be vulnerable. Um, and so yeah, I do definitely feel like, and it's I know that was something I struggled with growing like in high school. Um, my dad got custody over me and my sister because the situation at my mom's house wasn't too good at the time. Um, and so moving and not telling any of my friends goodbye. I know I had this interesting thing. I grew up. Um, and moved a lot towards the beginning. It wasn't really, it was only, well, it was a lot for me to like, I think it affected me in a certain sense. So like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then I moved to a school in third grade, and that's where I stuck. In that district is where I stuck from third to eighth grade first semester, right? So, I used to joke with my friends throughout that time period and be like, when friends would leave or, they would have to move schools, I would joke around and be like, "Hey, I'm moving," right? Which I don't know why. I didn't know why at the time, but I think it was just kind of like I don't know the terminology for it, but I was like, I think subconsciously I was kind of scared of having to do that. And so to be able to joke about it was like, cool. And then when the time came, I didn't say a word to anybody that I was leaving because we weren't supposed to leave until to the end of the next semester. So after eighth grade year, then ninth grade, we would go and be with my dad because it was half and half usually. Um, my mom would have more time, but then it was kind of half and half or whatever. So I think 4 days with my mom, 3 days with my dad. Um, but yeah, and then situation happened with my sister, and my dad was like, probably best to just move sooner. So we left the first semester of or the second semester of my eighth grade year, and I didn't tell anybody. Um, and I just kind of like it is what it is until the beginning of my sophomore year. Going into my sophomore year, I realized the effect that it had on me, and it was starting to affect me a lot. And was mourning and grieving that having to leave my friends and having to leave my mom and all that stuff, which the circumstance was the way it was because of her and stuff like that. But I was really close to my mom, and so to have to move and to have to live with my dad, it was just a lot. And so I remember having this really bad, that sophomore year to feel really my sophomore year was just really bad. I was depressed, I was lonely, isolated myself. I was very different than what I was. Um, and I remember that, I told my dad and what I was going through and that I didn't like school and stuff like that. And, he was just kind of like trying to comfort, but was like, you still got to go to school, stuff like that. Uh, I remember telling my mom that I talked to him, and she kind of, what was interesting is, she was like, God has a plan for your life. And at the time, I wasn't really even thinking or concerned about God at that time. But I remember her saying that and it being like, okay, it is, whatever. But it was cool because she was like, God has something planned for you and something in store for you. And, he loves you and I love you. And, it's going to be okay. Um, but there was never like there was nothing they could really do, right? I mean, they were trying to be there for me, but I really isolated myself and I really needed the space to just kind of go over what was going on. But because I was so shy and like emotional, I didn't feel like I could ever get it out. So I would go to different avenues to kind of fill that void, which never filled the void. Um, but yeah, I remember that being pretty important, or that time being very crucial of like, that's when, I think I started thinking more, started pondering things more. And I felt like obviously things turned out, great because, God used that and, has, changed my life, as time has went on and, things are better now. But I do feel like if I were to have had that space to be vulnerable and open about what was going on, not to say that there would be an immediate change, but I think I would just to know that I'm able to express how I feel would be nice. And I feel like I didn't want to be ungrateful for, being in a better circumstance, right? But at the same time, it was just like I just dreaded being at the school. I started to dislike my teammates, so I quit football after the season was over. Um, and I just don't feel like there's a lot of spaces, genuine spaces, right? I feel like there's spaces, but that doesn't mean just because someone is given a space to be vulnerable that it's the best thing for them, right? Um, and so I feel like if there was more spaces to where people could be vulnerable and it was actually beneficial and there was genuine love and care that, you know, things would be better in a sense. And, I'm kind of, big on, God and, Jesus being that, being what healed me of that, because even, I got out of that depression after the sophomore year, but there was still that trauma and that hurt. Um, and a lot of stuff I didn't necessarily deal with until I came to Christ, right? But yes, I do feel that there's a lack of care for men's mental stability and what's going on internally.
Yeah, that's interesting when you brought up how when you were truly upset about, having to move and stuff, but you kind of covered it up with humor to your friends. Like from my experience, it seems that a lot of guys like to cover up their pain with humor, or they kind of like, brush it off and like do something, or kind of like seclude themselves. And I wanted to ask you, Eric, like, did you feel like anyone ever got irritated at you for kind of like not expressing yourself as much in a way where you can just come out and be like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, but instead just covering it up with humor and stonewalling? Because I know like for some women out there that kind of bugs us in a way, like where it's like, okay, like you shouldn't be like laughing about this, or you should really talk about your feelings a little more, even though we could like we sometimes we could see through it. So did you ever have anyone, maybe specifically a female in your life, that you were going through something and you kind of just like stonewalled it or covered it up with humor and they were upset about it?
Yeah, so what's interesting is like when I was moving school or was, having to move, that's when I wasn't there wasn't any humor. I was just kind of quiet.
Mm.
And I don't know, nobody ever said it, no one ever brought up that something was wrong or asked me, what's wrong. Um, everybody just kind of went about how they were. But I will say more recently, in my relationship with my fiance, um, we had a situation happen, because, we're, you know, uh, we believe, that God is calling us to, and feel that it's expressed through His Word to wait till marriage, right? To have any of those intimate things until marriage, right? And so we had a date one day, and just I was internally struggling with it. We kind of got into it about a certain situation where he kind of called me out on um lusting after, and it was like I looked at a girl and then I like kind of, and me and her have had this conversation where it's like, you can't sometimes you can't help seeing something like if you turn around and you see a person, like you can't help that part, but it's continuing to look. And so that was the first time I had ever been called out about it before. And so I kind of got upset and angry and, I'm not usually, it's not always like an argumentative thing. It's kind of like I just get silent and that I'm angry. And later on I apologize, but then, some other stuff happens where, I'm just kind of discouraged because, we're having to wait. We don't have a set date on when we're going to get married. And I'm just kind of frustrated. And so we get to our house and we're we're outside in the car and, she's asking me what's wrong, asking me what's wrong. And I'm just like, I'm good, I'm good. And this is before I found out, stonewalling thing. But I know that that's an issue. I knew that that was an issue with me a lot. It's just not being vulnerable. Like I feel like I am vulnerable, but then when it gets like where I just don't want to talk about stuff and I say I'm good, that's like when I really need to talk, right? And I remember I kept just being like I'm good and just kind of being nonchalant about it or whatever, and she got upset and she left. And then as she was walking away and about to go into the house, I called her back and then I kind of just broke down about, what I was dealing with and what I was struggling with and God kind of comforted me. I remember actually looking at the window of the car because I had just gotten done like crying about it because I just felt so overwhelmed with this desire of you know acting on these desires, right? But and I'm having to understand even now, like, just because we're waiting till marriage and once we get married doesn't mean that, I'll be fulfilled in that area. Like there still has to be self-control and patience. Because, outside of this relationship, there's been a lot of times where I've resorted to other things to fulfill those types of desires, right? So I remember looking out the window and I see a bird um come down and it's near a tree and I start thinking about this the scripture in the Bible in Matthew. It's the same chapter I was talking about earlier in the same around the same verse where it talks about look at the birds of the air. They neither reap nor sow, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? And I remember just reading that, and I pulled out my Bible, and I kept reading that, around that those verses, and then just read that whole thing, and just started crying again, because it's like I just have to make sure to seek Him about it, and just give all those burdens to Him. But yeah, that's been a more recent example of me stonewalling, bottling up my emotions and it affecting, her because, she thinks something's wrong, like she did something wrong, or, it just kind of bothers her that I won't talk about it. Um, so yeah, that's an example I have.
Right, right. That was a great example because that happens often, even regardless of relationship, like even friendship between women and men. There's a difference with how each one expresses themselves, how they deal with like whether they're called out on something they don't like, rejection, all that. So that was a great example there, and thanks for sharing that because I know that wasn't easy. But so yeah, Bo, you.
Yeah, I'd also say that they go rather unseen. Like, you know, I'm online a lot. I've been with my little friend group for a while. And yeah, like Eric was saying, or Eric was doing in his story, a lot of men when they kind of have to bring down the stone wall just immediately crumble. I guess crumbles is a fine word, but like break down, like just the weight of everything hits them at once, and that's especially the reason why a lot of men will typically double down on the stone wall. It's because they know it's going to be it'll be relieving, but it'll be, embarrassing. It'll be, leave them exposed, vulnerable, all that. Yeah, as for avenues for men's mental health, yeah, there's not a whole lot of ways. Like, I remember seeing like a few articles over the years of all those men mental health clinics that just get like protested and shut down and don't get the funding they need. So outside of friends and family, they're usually or uh partners, there's not really a lot of other avenues men would have. And I would also agree with the fact that comedy is the most common kind of deflecting tactic for it, where you kind of share a little bit, but it's under the guise of a joke, so it bothers you less to say it.
I see, I see. And you mentioned about like men's mental health places or clinics being shut down here and there. Do you feel like just asking you, Bo, do you feel like it's because how you guys mentioned before when I asked that question of how is a woman's role is different from a man's role? Do you feel like it's because there's the expectation in society that men should get through their issues and figure it out?
Yeah, like most I'd definitely say too, a lot of the older generation, like the generation of people, it's probably closer to their 50s or 60s, were massive on that mentality of kind of just keeping it in. If I remember right, a lot of protests around men's mental health clinics was mostly women. Like,
Oh,
oh, they
interesting.
don't need this, they don't need that. Why are you even doing that? Because the reason why I remember it decently, I could be wrong in some details, of course, but the reason I remember it decently vividly is because one of the guys who's trying to set up one, it just failed horribly and he ended up killing himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, it was a really depressing story.
Was that around your area or was that
Oh
something?
no, it was just on the news. Yeah, I
Oh,
don't believe it was anywhere near me, but
oh, okay.
it was one of those headlines where it's just a very sad story.
Wow. That's definitely unfortunate. Wow, I didn't know that.
Hmm.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, so moving along here, let's get into double standards, right? So let's just start off with the simple basic question here for both of you. Do you believe in double standards when it comes to men and women? Yes or no? Eric?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yes for both of you. All right.
Yep.
Okay. And I mean, if you want to explain why you can, or are you guys good with just the yes answer?
I think there's a lot of double standards. I mean, and some of them, I guess I can understand to a certain extent, but like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things that I know at least women in that are shown in society, they want a lot of certain things, but then if you were to ask that same thing of them, they wouldn't be willing to do that. They wouldn't be willing to do the things that men do. Um,
I got a good
like that.
example of that one.
Yeah, go ahead, go
The
ahead.
whole it's a very old one. It was an old joke for a while. It was women are like, we want to vote, and men are like, so you want to join the draft too? It's like, no, we want to vote. It's like, but we have to join the draft if we vote. You should too. It's like, no, we want to vote.
Yeah, that was one of the things too that a lot of people were talking about, and I'll probably bring that up later in our conversation about the draft because a lot of people were going like kind of mocking like people who were for gender equality and stuff was saying, okay, well, you know, since you guys are like feminists and stuff, like you should feel okay with entering the draft as well, a potential draft. But that's a good
Hmm.
point you brought up there. Yeah.
I view that as one of the bigger double standards. There's a lot of smaller ones, but that's kind of the not original, but
Right. Right. All right. So the reason why I asked you guys that because based on this blog site, i.e., couplescounseling.com, it mentions a couple of double standards, and I want to read a few of them to you, and you guys just tell me whether you think it's true or false. And if you want to explain your answer for each one, you can. So I'm going to start with number one here. So women who want to cuddle are affectionate, but men who want to cuddle are needy. Eric?
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Okay, so your false on that?
Yeah, that's false. That's
Okay.
false.
Did you want to explain or you'll pass it on?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I think I think in some instances it can come off like that, where the man is being needy. But I think, and I could just go based off of I personally want to go off of, scripture, it talks about in Genesis, God, created Adam and then created Eve by taking the rib from Adam and, Adam saying, bone, now, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she came from man. And um, that being part of God's creation, that the two, came together and they became one flesh. Or, that is why, a man will leave his father and his mother and, be with his wife and they will become one flesh. I feel like certain aspects of intimacy, when it's, under the way God made it, um, I feel like that's a part of God's creation, right? So I don't know if it's just a neediness, right? It's it's genuine. Now there are some instances where, like I said earlier, the whole objectification thing, doing things and looking at women as just objects. But I don't think that's always the case, right? So yeah, that's kind of why I believe that's false.
Okay, Bo?
Yeah, so I'll go a similar answer. Like it's relationship to relationship.
Okay. All right, number two. A married woman without a job is seen as a housewife or a homemaker, but a married man without a job is seen as a failure. And true or false in that, and you're free to explain. Eric?
Uh, yeah, true.
Okay.
I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I think that can definitely be perceived that way. I think there's a lot more criticism because sometimes that may not even be like what like it's different if they go into the relationship and that's kind of just how, the wife, wanted to be, a housewife and, that was kind of agreed upon. But then, there's a lot of more judgment. And I don't know if this is saying the scenario of a woman working and a man. Yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Um, it is at least how I grew up and what I've seen. It's very, very rare, and I don't think I've necessarily seen that. But I think that's really judgmental to look at that a certain, to view that in a way and not view, to view a woman being a stay-at-home wife, and then if you flip the roles, judge a man and say that he's a failure. And we don't even know the context. It could be different types of context. They could have agreed upon that, just like the man and the husband and the man and the woman agreed that the woman would be a housewife, right? So, um, yeah, I do feel like that's true.
Okay, Bo?
I'd say that's true, and the best example I can think of is I believe it's Japan. It could be China, but I do mix them up quite a lot. So they have a much more, let's just say, proud system than we do. Like if a man loses his job, it doesn't always even matter the reason. They may never return home. They may just leave the second they're fired. Like go on the train, go on the bus, and end themselves, become homeless, go so because they're so scared of dishonoring their family that it's better to never come back than to have to face them and tell them you can't provide. I
Okay.
mean, women don't have it great over there either. I don't know if you've heard of marriage markets, but
Oh, I mean, if you want to explain to help educate people on that.
so marriage markets so okay, I don't, I'm not condoning any of this. I'm just, going through it. Basically, when you're over 30, you're not, it's you're 30, 35, you're out of your prime. So most people don't want you. So you stand in a market with photos of yourself and lists of your life, and men will walk through there and pick the people they want
Holy.
because you don't have much other choice if you make it that far in life without a partner.
And you said this is somewhere in Asia, right?
Yeah, I believe Japan could be China.
Wow, I'd never heard of that. Have you, Eric?
I have not. That's interesting.
I like going into esoteric information.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't know about that. Okay. All right, on to number 3. A man who speaks his opinion is strong and passionate, but a woman who speaks her opinion is seen as extra and annoying. Eric?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I think especially in certain circumstances, women aren't heard. And I think there's a lack of respect. A lack, and once again goes back to the whole understanding thing. Um, there's definitely a need for, a woman, whether it be in a relationship, whether it be at work, whether it be whatever circumstance. I think it's very important that, you know, um, that both genders are heard, right? And there to be, for there to be judgment or condemning for a woman to share her opinion or to share her frustration or share just whatever opinion it may be. I think that's in a sense disrespectful. Now, there are circumstances for both men and women where it's like you probably didn't need to say that, right? But I'm thinking more so like things that are not even necessarily like the most important, like the most serious things, but something they're concerned with, something they're not happy with. Um, I think it's important that, both sides are heard, both genders are heard. And so to say that, they're just being, annoying or just kind of just being complaining, um, I think that's pretty whack. So yeah.
Okay, Bo?
Yeah, I can agree it's whack. It is true though. There's a with every stereotype, there can be a bit of truth to it. So, in movies nowadays, there's always a lot of that depiction of the what's it called? Like rich fat cat man, and then the woman who has her life together, and whenever she says anything, the guy on top gets angry. So we even have like kind of stereotypical depictions of that in media.
Okay, all right. Number 4. Men who like sex or have a lot of sex are seen as powerful and admired, but a woman who likes sex or has a lot of sex is seen as sloppy, nasty, or overly promiscuous. Eric?
I think that's true. I think in our society, I know when I was growing up, and I just, go off, I've been, I was more, I'm only 21, right? So I was more a kid than I've been an adult, right? And even now it's still a little like on the edge of, in between, right? At least when it comes to, I don't know how to describe it, but anyway, um, yeah, I know that like being a virgin was laughed at when a guy was a virgin. And then if a girl wasn't or was with a lot of dudes, she would be called a whole bunch of names and would be viewed in a certain way. Um, and so, yeah, I definitely think there's a bias. I think, the men are seen to be more, more respected and the women are more disrespected and are called out their names. And I do think they're for both men and women. I think there shouldn't be the the constant having sex with everybody, that's detrimental for the for them. And I don't think that's expressed in our culture, right? There's a lot of the times when things are viewed, whether it be movies, whether it be videos, there's just this it's just the joy and the pleasure that comes from having sex, but then they don't ever show the consequences, right? And we only ever see the consequences in our own circumstances when we do the same thing. And there's many consequences for things like that, right? um and so that's why and going back to the Bible and scripture, how important it is to be in that covenant of marriage, between a man and a woman, because of those consequences, right? And I know that I've heard growing up, and still now, God is trying to put limits on us, and God doesn't want us to be who we are and express who we are, and to enjoy the pleasures of life. But I think there is, just like a parent has discipline rules. I think this that example is that way with God, right? There's a reason why there's all these, God has, his commands, and, there's a reason why, when Jesus came, he was being more, he gave more detail on what God commanded in the Old Testament, and how those things affect us, right? And so men are viewed in our society as, they're the coolest guys ever when they're with a bunch of women. But in reality, although what we see on the outside looks like they're cool and stuff, they're going through a lot internally. And that doesn't even have to be said. It's it's shown in due time, right? And then same for women, right? Like, yes, they're and now it's become more of a, in our society nowadays it's more respected, in a sense, way more respected than it has been in the past. But even that is isn't good for them either, because of how much that affects them, spiritually, emotionally, physically, and that's for both ends, right? So I do think there's a I do think in totality, I think the perceptions of both of those are wrong. But I do think that, yes, men get more respect when they do it, and when women do it, they're more disrespected, called out their names, and yeah.
Okay. All right, Bo.
Yeah, I agree. Summed it up pretty nicely.
Okay. All right, number 5. A woman who cries is seen as in touch with her emotions or feelings, but a man who cries is seen as soft or weak.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would definitely say that. I mean, if you cried in high school, I mean, it depended on the reason, of course. But like, if you cried in high school, man, you're not getting a good rep. Your reputation. I mean, if you're a man, if you're a woman, we had a good amount of women cry in our high school, but it it's just something people look at and then they forget about. But if a man cries or one of your friends cries, yeah, it's gonna be remembered for a few weeks. Even if people don't make fun of you, you still gotta live with that haunting. Everyone remembers it, and it's basically just because you're a man.
Eric?
Yeah, definitely. I think the perception on it, it's, I guess maybe because it's more seen, seeing women cry is a more known thing and a more seen thing than men crying. I know me personally, I've been emotional always, right? And I've been a crier, right? So, um, for me, it wasn't like, there was never this thing where I felt like I couldn't cry. Obviously, there are the how it was received by others is different than it would be a girl, right? But I remember, I remember the circumstance where I liked this guy's girlfriend, um, and I don't. I don't remember really how it went turned out, but basically he was upset and angry and was talking about fighting me after school. And I remember,
Jeez.
um, like I remember crying because I was scared because I'm not a fighter. I'm not that at all. Right? I've never been. I think as I've gotten older, I've you know a little less tolerant of like certain things. So like I said earlier, like the feeling more hardened. Um, but like back then, I was super emotional and was like scared out of my. I remember crying and running out the room, just thinking about it. Um, but I think the perception of like me crying was viewed as like weak or like he's scary or stuff like that, right? I think the perception of those two different things are definitely women are allowed to cry and it's okay and it's normal, right? People can go about their business when, women, girls cry, but when guys cry, it's either they get laughed at or it's kind of like don't know what to say or do. So yeah.
You said that classmate wanted to bite you?
Oh no no no, sorry.
Right.
Fight me, not bite me.
Oh, I was
Not
about to
bite me.
say,
Not bite me.
holy. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
was
that
about to
would have been
say,
pretty
bite. I ain't gonna lie.
bite is wild,
I'll tell the principal if
Yeah,
someone wanna
that's wild.
bite you. What? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the weird thing. I don't think I told anybody. I don't think I told any teacher either because I was like, I didn't want to be a snitch, but at the
oh
same
yeah,
time, I
you
was
get
like,
dogged on
yeah,
so
yeah,
bad if
yeah.
you avoid a fight.
I was scared. So all I could do was cry.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
usually trying to avoid the fight gets you in
Yeah,
more fights than just fighting the
yeah,
dude.
yeah.
All right. Number 6. A woman who gets angry is seen as aggressive, irrational, or complains too much, but a man who is angry is seen as confident, stern, or an alpha who knows what he wants. And who wants to start this one?
Yeah, it just depends on the circumstance of person to person. I mean, I think when it's more just one on one, it's usually yeah. I'd say the stereotype can be correct and not at the same time. Or the yeah, yeah. You can go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think for men it's like it feels like I think Bo made a reference to it earlier, kind of like something that like is just kind of normal for men.
Mhm.
Um, but I feel like so it comes off like that's what a man's supposed to be, that's how a man's supposed to be. Um, but like I think that's true, but I also didn't I grew up in a family in an environment where it wasn't seen as too crazy, right? So like I have my sister who's 2 years younger than me was more of the aggressive and would start issues and be angry and would be that I was more of the emotional one. I would get angry, but like I would never resort to like really like saying like wild stuff or stuff like that. Like yes, we've had me and her have had intense arguments, but like that's not really in my nature. It seemed like she was more comfortable being in that space than I was. Um, but on a normal basis, I think for sure, I think or not normal basis, but what we've seen in society and what's portrayed on uh with movies and TV shows or books or just things that we've seen in our own spaces. It's definitely more. I feel like people understand a man being aggressive, showing his anger, and I think it's more accepted. But a woman doing that, it's some people could say it's not classy of a woman to do it. Some people can say they acting out of character. But I think we both men and women have those tendencies of being angry and I think people should be handling their anger in better ways. But I think, yeah, I think there definitely is a bias when it comes to that. So yeah,
Okay, and
It
last one.
definitely more. Oh,
Go ahead, go ahead.
and definitely anger can be more present in situations where the other person may know violence won't happen. Like there's been videos and things I've seen in my life where people will take advantage of they know you can't do anything to them so they can do whatever they want. That can also play a part in it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. Yeah, like
Like
abusive
like two
relationships.
two yeah, like two men might not yell at each other because they know a physical altercation could happen. But a woman yelling at a man can be a lot more safe in the assumption that nothing's going to happen there, especially with how the court system is.
Mm,
A man gets murdered in the court system. At least
interesting.
American court. I don't know about other countries. Yeah, whether it's divorce, domestic abuse, pretty much if you get in an altercation with a woman and you're a man, you can assume to lose that case.
Yeah, I've seen examples where some guys kind of have to like stay calm and resist. Like because sometimes there
Or
are
just eat the punches.
right there. Sometimes there's like manipulative women who will kind of like trap guys into being aggressive or trying to get them to hit them so like they can victimize themselves, say, oh, you see, you did hit me, and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of guys have to kind of control themselves. I know from that standpoint that happens sometimes.
There is one my last little bit on this. There is a comedian that used to tell the a little joke or a little bit. I don't remember how most of it went, but he was like, whenever I see domestic violence on TV, and I'm not condoning it, but whenever I see domestic violence on TV when the man hit the woman, I wonder, what did she say before it happened? Like, it's not right, but what did she say?
That's an interesting point. Sometimes it can be over the top. Like sometimes they probably didn't say nothing that crazy, but then there's sometimes where it's like they said something really slick, and it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah, I know one of the big ones is like, if a marriage isn't going well, or, if there's boyfriend, girlfriend, there's children involved, like the woman would threaten, to, take custody of the children. That could set a guy off. I know that's been an
Yeah, because the
example.
guy knows he's losing.
yeah,
Well, typically.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's unfortunate, but those things do happen. Yeah, so I'm gonna add one more here. I'm gonna add a bonus question here. So, a man who is being abusive to women or inappropriately is touching a woman is seen as a predator, dangerous, a criminal, or very disrespectful. However, a woman who is doing the same, being abusive or inappropriately touches a man, is seen as playful, flirtatious, crazy, or wild. And Bo, you could start.
Yeah, I actually I don't know if anyone's ever watched South Park. They had a fun segment on this. It was a teacher that had relations with their student, and when one of the other students called the police and explained it, the police were like, "Oh, so where does he live? So we can hand him the world's luckiest child medal."
Wow,
Yeah,
yeah,
because a lot of times this does happen where if a man were to be with like a 40-year-old man was to be with a 16-year-old girl, jail immediately. If
yeah,
a 40-year-old woman be with a 16-year-old dude, she might get fired, but the chances for jail are far lower. And a lot of this is born out of the culture that men are just always ready to go. It doesn't, even if they're young, just that's all they think about, that's all they want. So it's like some people kind of take advantage of the cultural kind of thought process that, oh yeah, they want it no matter what, so I can do it whenever I want. Like there's been news reports where like some men are afraid to reject women for sex, like if they're married or in relationship, because they're afraid of something happening. Like there's been men shot, hit with multiple objects just because they said no, like they weren't in the mood. And some people are just like, what do you mean you're not in the mood? You're a man. You have to be in the mood.
yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely think both. I think that's true. Definitely both circumstances are wild, and I don't think should be happening, of course, and but I think that's true. I think our culture has really perverted and made things really, really, really wicked. And so like that is the kid who has those relations with the teacher, like you brought up, or
Mhm.
with the older woman in general, is respected
Yeah, it's
by
just
his
like,
peers, right?
he did it.
Yeah, exactly, right. But then a girl and a guy, or older man and a younger girl, that's like unacceptable, not tolerated at all, right? And
Same
neither
with
one
the
should be tolerated.
boss dynamic too. And like
Yeah.
not, like same age and anything, but the
Mhm.
boss dynamic of male and female, female male.
Yeah, no, that's true too. Yeah, because the age thing doesn't even have to be a thing. It's just the roles that are the roles in that dynamic. But yeah, I think it's yeah, well, I think it's, and I don't know how it is around like in other, countries and stuff like that, but I know that our culture has, in our society, has painted a pretty bad picture of that, and tolerate a lot of things that shouldn't be tolerated. And yeah, I think it's pretty wild to think that, a 13-year-old kid and a 13-year-old boy and a 13-year-old girl are the same age. But if they were to have, the girl was with the older man and the boy was with the older woman, um, how acceptable one is and how one isn't. Or like how you're bringing up like men not wanting to, um, have those types of relations. But the woman just keeps pressing them and pressing them. And the guy is considered weak, or they call him a
Are
certain
you
name
really a
because,
man?
yeah, are you really a man? Or do you even like women, stuff like that? Like, and it's like a man can't have boundaries or respect for himself to not want to do that. But or a man, like they're saying, basically saying a man can't have respect for himself. But a woman is respected and is held in a high regard if she doesn't want to, and men have to be like okay with that, um, and not pushy, or you're getting the cops called on you, and something most likely is gonna happen, right? But then if a woman does it, it's just, oh, she likes you, dude. Like, why are you tripping? Like, if I were you, I'd be cool with that right off the rip. Um, So yeah, I think our society and our culture, and it may not just be in our country. I mean, it may be that way in other countries too, but I think it's a really perverse thing. And I don't know. I think society's perception of things is really skewed. So yeah,
All
You
right.
know, that reminded me of a double standard that I completely forgot about for a while.
yeah, for
The
sure.
whole if a man and a woman are drunk and then they get with each other, it's the man who did it to the woman.
Mm,
It's not the woman that did it to the man. Like whenever if this goes to like court or anything, like if there's any regret that happens, it's usually the man's fault, even if they both were inebriated or both had something wrong with them. Or I just thought that was an interesting one
yeah,
too.
yeah,
You guys mentioned the double standard about like the differences between how men and women are viewed based on their relationships. What do you guys think would be the solution to that? Where it's like, okay, how can society kind of develop more of this mindset like, hey, it doesn't matter what gender, if you're doing wrong, you're doing wrong. And I guess Bo, you could start.
It's kind of holding accountability. I don't entirely agree with how they used to do it because, all the stories my grandfather used to tell me and all like the older people in my family. The way men were held accountable, you did wrong, there was going to be a fight. Like, oh, you groped that girl. She doesn't like you. There'd be a fight. You did this wrong. You did like it was only for more atrocious stuff, but you were held to a standard, otherwise you would get beaten up. Like me, for instance, if a woman were to attack me, I have to sit there. Because even if I did fight back, that would just mean my entire family would jump me.
Hmm. Wow, interesting. Eric?
Yeah, no, it would be a terrible time.
Yeah, I think when it comes to I know for me, I think it's just where our values lie, right? So I think our society's perception of things are skewed, and not just in that area, but a lot of areas. But how does that change? Um, I think it changes um, by what we hold to the highest regard, right? So, I know, and I'll just speak for me on in my life, what I held valuable and what was right and wrong in my eyes was perceived on what I saw growing up, what I see in society, because we're easily influenced by a lot of things, right? Um, but when I came, to be a believer in Christ, and reading his word and having that perspective changed, and it's still being changed, right? Because yes, you can read the words that are on this page, and the Lord gives better understanding of certain things, but putting it into action is what is important, right? So, like for example, I didn't see prior to being a believer that lusting after a woman was wrong, right? It was just something that society said, hey, this is what you do. Um, Watching certain videos like pornography, that was accepted. It wasn't wrong. Now, you wouldn't be like, hey, mom and dad, I'm, watching this type of stuff. But you also weren't judged if you were to tell a friend. Um, and so our perception in society and what our world tells us is that it's fine. It's okay. We have these hormones, these desires, all of that. Just act it out, just be careful. Um, but then, God talks about, you know, saving that intimacy and those things for marriage, right? And not lusting after a woman in your heart, right? Because that's not of his design. Um, and so like stuff like that, and that's just an example that comes to mind for me because I know that's something that I've struggled with, that I still struggle with. Um, but just I think what we hold to the highest regard in our lives, right? Like if we hold our careers or our even ourselves to the highest regard, our perception is skewed, and what we desire and what we want and what we seek after is skewed, right? And so if we hold, let's say, our desires of wanting to fulfill the intimacy feelings, like having sex or masturbation, stuff like that, if we just constantly um, want to fulfill those desires, it can get pretty dark in how we fulfill those desires. I know for me, it was that way, going to lengths that I shouldn't have gone to, having desires that I shouldn't have had. Um, so yeah, um, I think it comes down to what we hold to the highest regard, what's the most important things in our life. Um, and I think that's
Right.
how our perception on things are, how they're formed. So yeah.
Moving on, I want to ask you guys, in your opinion, do you believe, well, yeah, in your opinion, do you think it's okay if a woman wants to be more masculine? And do you think it's okay, in your opinion, if a man wants to be more feminine? And I'll start with Bo.
Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with either. Yeah, I'm fine with it. Again, I have a lot of Samoan women around me. They're predominantly more masculine than they are feminine. So yeah, I wouldn't say I had any particular problems with it. Of course, everything can go wrong in different aspects if you go too far in one thing or the other, but yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, right? Because I think our society once again messes up our perception of things, right? So a woman is called a tom, or a girl is called a tomboy if she dresses like a guy, right?
Hmm.
Um, or she doesn't wear pink, or and a man is considered, um, he's called a girl or stuff like that if he's too emotional, too scary. And I think our perception is skewed, right? Like, I believe that we're created in God's image, so He created us the way that we're supposed to be, right? And so obviously, I don't want to get that skewed with how the world perceives that to be like, oh, be who you are, because I don't think in society people are being who they are. I think they're being who what their sin is. Um, and so yeah, I don't think it's a bad like for me, like I'm not this super masculine guy. Like I'm emotional. I've never been this like hard dude that's just like doesn't lacks emotion, lacks, like no, I'm in touch with my emotions. I cry at times, right? Like I'm deep in thought about certain things, right? I know that there's women out there who, and not just the dressing wise, but just how they are and their personalities, their attitudes. But I don't think that makes them less of a woman. I think that's just how God has created them, right? So, yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing, and I think once again, like I said, our perception on that is skewed. So,
All right. So, I want to ask you guys, some people may value the term high value man as a man who has his life together, very confident. He has his priorities together. He could get a woman that he wants. He's rich, successful in certain situations. So, let me ask you guys, what is your definition of a high value man? And do you think that you are a high value man? And I'll start with Bo.
You know, high value man would probably be generally someone who had themselves together more than they had like I mean it's good to have a stable job, a stable place to live, but if you're not emotionally regulated, then no matter what you have, it could all still fall apart regardless. So to me, if you had someone that could control themselves, relieve stress when they need to, not go off the walls, making a good amount of money, having nice things, that's more of an afterthought, but would definitely help things. I mean, most people wouldn't say no to a lot of money, so yeah, I'd say it's probably a high value man, someone able to control themselves and have a nice foundation.
Okay, and then the second part to the question was, do you consider yourself a high value man?
Hmm. I'm gonna go with no.
Okay. All right, Eric.
yeah, so I think in our society, a high value man, I think it's based on a lot of. So I won't just say that. So I guess it can vary, but when it comes to how knowledgeable they are, how you know, the popularity or notoriety they have or the money they have, because not everybody has, fame, but, some people can have more money or how they're perceived by others. I think it's how respected men are. Um, I think so I think it has to do with those types of things, at least in our society. Now, what I believe to be when it comes to, I don't even know if it would be that same terminology of a high value man, right? Um, but in scripture, it talks about, Jesus, when he's talking to his disciples, he talks about if you want to be the greatest, you have to be, the servant for the rest of them, right? So, being humble, um, loving, being caring and merciful and forgiving others. That's what's in scripture is told is how we're supposed to be. And so that's kind of that's kind of the what I'm going based off of, right? Like I don't go based off of societies. And when I try to, I would just I wouldn't be in a great space, right? Because I feel like early on in my life, I realized that a lot of things didn't matter. Um, that was shown in the world, right? But there wasn't no foundation of what is important. Um, And so, I grew up not necessarily, I had kind of like the best of both worlds type of thing, right? Where, my dad was, financially stable. And so we got a lot of things that we wanted. My mom, not so much, but we got the spending time with family, playing outside. We got that aspect and that, whole thing from my mom's side, right? And those types of relationships, and so, I kind of early on realized that money wasn't all that was told by the world, right? Um, and then career wise, I never really knew what I wanted to do, right? I remember in sixth grade, at the end of sixth grade, when we had like our little graduation thing, which in my district it was kindergarten through sixth grade. So they had this thing, and they had this whiteboard, and we took a picture in front of this tree, or it was a chalkboard, but this little green chalkboard, and we had to put like what we wanted to be when we grew up. I remember putting something awesome. Now, hardly used the word awesome, but I really didn't know what to say because it was never really a thought. I never really thought about going to college. I wanted to play football. I knew that, but as I go older, I realized that's probably not going to happen. Um, so yeah, just and then wanted to be the best at something, right? Um, I wasn't the best at football. I enjoyed being competitive, right? But there wasn't really thing I was really that I thought I was good at and that I really pursued until I got into music. And that was something that I was really passionate about, worked on for many years until more recently, it became more of oh, I'm just seeking people's validation. I'm just seeking to be the best, to be praised and get some type of respect from it, right? Um, and I started to realize that that's it doesn't really matter, and it was affecting me, right? Because I was trying to put it behind this aspect of, oh, I'm sharing God's word, when in reality, I was still concerned about what people thought of how this sounded, right? Or this song sounded, or trying to be the best, right? And so I realized that is fleeting, right? But then God showed me this new way of living and being, and my perspective has changed. So that's just kind of how I feel about that. And then whether or not I feel like I'm a high value man, no, I don't. I don't think by society standards. And then if I'm going off to the standards that I believe in, there's still a lot more work to be done. So yeah.
Right, right. And now let me ask you guys: do you think there is such thing as a high value woman? And if so, what examples do you have, Bo?
High value woman. Hmm. I'd probably define it basically identically with a high value man of emotionally stable. Uh, money's nice, but again, that's the kind of golden goose I would say. 'Cause we have a lot of crazy is not the right word, but unstable people. I mean, you're always gonna have problems, of course, but kind of wrestling your own demons until you're in a good spot.
Okay. All right, Eric.
Yeah. So kind of like what Bo said, I think society's men and women, what's considered high valued is kind of the same. Um, I think they're becoming more similar now than maybe back in the past, right? Um, but yeah, um,
Okay.
and then and then so then the standard that I believe in, I think is kind of like the standard that I was saying for the men when it comes to how God displays it in His Word, right? Um, So all those same things, like I think they're similar in both instances, right? Like in society, I think the high value man and woman is kind of the same. And then, and how God displays it in His Word and how we're supposed to be is the same as well.
Okay. Okay. All right, guys. Let's move on and talk about relationships. Right. What do you look for in a female partner? What qualities must she have? And I know for you, Eric, you might have a different response because you're in a relationship. So go based off on that. So yeah, let's start with Bo.
I'd probably say not a large temper. I know everyone's tempers can flare, but having a one that frequently ignites, someone who can go off the rails rather fast. I definitely want to have someone patient. Um, kind is definitely one. Relationships not a solo game to play. You both have to work with each other, provide how you can. So I mean that's the two main things I'd say. Other than that,
Okay, Eric.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, my perception on relationships and liking women and stuff was kind of skewed growing up. But now that I'm with my fiance, um, I know that what's the most important is her walk with her walk with God and her walk, that's really important, right? Because that's how we met in the first place, right? Um, and that can't, like, yes, our we're not always going to have the best days, right? And our walks with the Lord will kind of go, won't always be the greatest, right? But that is what brought us together is God, right? And so that's, I mean, and that's what I truly believe. Um, I think, um, I think the love and the care that she has is very unlike anything that I've experienced before. And I didn't grow up with a lot of friends, nor did I grow up with. I mean, I just had my family really that really knew how I was, because I was, kind of reserved until someone kind of like got me to open up. But I didn't really open up to anybody really. And so she's been kind of the first person that I've kind of opened up to in a long time. And the care and love that she has for me when, we're doing good and when we're not doing good is pretty important. And I think I pray that continues to be something that that she holds, because I know how important that is for me and how I want to display that as well. I think um, uh, just being understanding. I know that I struggle with a lot of things, and I think that she is very understanding, and I think we both have our own growth in that area of being understanding because we're human. We're in this fallen world, so it's we're bound to make mistakes and bound to be not as understanding as we should be. Um, but yeah, like Bo was saying, there's the fruits of the spirit, uh, love, patience, kindness, compassion, gentleness, um, self-control, and I say self-control as in with dealing with one another, right? I know that my temper can flare at times, and I can kind of say something slick that I shouldn't say. And so I think just being, going back to being kind and those things are pretty important, right? But then also just going back to the love thing, like loving throughout everything, right? Because not every day is good with us, right? Like we have our moments. Um, and when it comes to what we believe in, we believe that we are persecuted, right? And not just by, spreading, God's word, but also, by the enemy, right? And so constant, I know in our engagement, we've had way more persecution than probably any other moment or any other time period in our relationship. But it's something that, we're loving each other through it. And, going to the Lord first and foremost. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. What are some turnoffs or red flags you guys have about women? Bo?
hmm, I I kind of it's definitely not everyone, but I see it often enough that I've kind of internalized it. Colored hair in a good amount of cases. Like most people I've met that, especially women that have colored hair, are rather volatile. Can be about any topic, but
Wait, what? I mean, what color? Like more natural colors, or just like the?
no, yeah, like the bright pink, the bright like if it's a hair color that you're specifically doing for I mean, you could be doing it for any number of reasons, but I
Mhm.
usually see it as like attention seeking, like the bright
Mm.
red, bright pink, bright like hair color your hair can never be. That like maybe one person on earth like had that hair color, but
Mhm.
you know,
Okay.
just a very artificial color.
Eric.
Um, yeah, I think what's interesting, I think I remember in high school, my junior year, there was actually someone that I kind of got to know, but I didn't really see it like I didn't really like her in that way, but she was like kind of the first girl I like went out my way to talk to. Um, and I remember, she was 2 years younger than me, right? So she's a freshman. And I was just getting to know her. Like I said, I didn't see her in that way or anything. But I remember as, we started to get to know each other more and I kind of like started feeling like, oh, maybe she likes me or something. I remember the lack of personality that she had was kind of like it was like, oh, that kind of throws me off, right? Because a girl can be cute, but then if they don't really have a personality or something that they care about, then it's kind of like, and she's a freshman, so I get it, but I think that brief time, getting to know that person was helped me to realize was the beginning process of realizing that there's some more, a woman that I'm with has to have things that she cares about, a personality, um, has to, just be passionate about something. So yeah,
Okay,
There
so
was a
someone that's not dry.
yes, for sure.
Go ahead, Bo.
there was a scary study where there is a I think it was 10%. There's a large subset of people that have no internal voice. Like when you're like thinking to yourself or talking to yourself at all.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of those people are that where they don't have the internal voice, so they don't think. Like not literally don't think, but like they can't have their own like monologue or anything or work through different issues in their head as easily.
That's interesting.
That really is interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, I mean like I look at some people and I'm like I don't see any light behind your eyes. I don't know.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
that
I
you're
get what you're saying.
specifically dumb. There's just something wrong. Like,
Yeah, I get what you're talking
uh,
about. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like humans are pretty good at telling what's off in some scenarios.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, like they say the eyes are the windows to the soul and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if there's no light back there, you don't want to be anywhere near.
But what are some things you learned from past relationships with women and how will you apply it to future relationships? Bo?
Hmm. If you ever have a problem, make sure you work it out. Like if you have a problem with someone, you have to let them know. If you don't let them know, that's a problem that's your problem now. If you're unwilling to tell someone that you don't like what they're doing or there's something they're doing is bugging you, that is your problem now because you decided not to tell them.
Okay.
Like that's something that you'll need to work through.
All right, Eric?
I know, like I brought up, um, the whole viewing women for how they look over who they are really has stuck with me. And has truly changed my perspective a lot because it's a drastic thing. Like at the end of the day, women are people, you know, and to just view them based off of how they look and that be the only reason why you're with them, it really is a skewed perspective, and that's the perspective that I had for a long, long time. Um, and that's also what's being portrayed in our society, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I think yeah, what's on the inside of someone is pretty important, and um, And regardless of what relationship that is, could be a friendship, right? I think that stuff is still really important. And
Do you guys ever think you would cheat on your partner? And if your partner cheats on you, what would you do? Bo?
All right. So I personally would never cheat. That's kind of against my set of morals. And if I'm cheated on, there's pretty much nothing on earth that's fixing that relationship because to me, a relationship goes nowhere without trust. And besides, like, attempted murder or something, there's not really much way of me trusting you less than you cheating on me. Like, I would rather be broken up with 100% of the time than be cheated on. So
Okay.
that's me. Like, there's not really much. The relationship's basically over after I figure it out.
Okay. All right, Eric.
yeah, so I'm actually, like I said, I'm engaged and, um, me and her have had constant conversations about, because I know in the beginning, there was a relationship, not a relationship, but a past relationship that she was wanting to let go. And, we kind of had that discussion and, she was willing to do that. Now, as like I was saying earlier about the girl prior to my fiance, we were still friends as me and my fiance started talking, right? And so as we go into dating, me and her are still friends. We even have this circumstance happen the day before I asked my fiance, or we had that conversation about dating, where the friend came to me and wanted to go to a concert, a worship concert with me, and had been wanting to ask me, but was kind of timid to. And so she asked me, and it was kind of like this weird thing, right? Because I wanted to spend time with this girl, particularly in the past, and now that I'm in, or now that I'm talking to somebody else, now that there's a pursuit coming from her. Um, and so I had to, pray on it, take into consideration of, the relationship that me and my fiance were building. It was like, out of respect for her, I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? And so, but we kept the friendship even as me and my fiance started dating. But it was kind of like I think I was just holding on to something, and there were thoughts of like, you know, not wanting to let go of that person because of the history that we had. Um, and so eventually, I would let go of it, because it was just a conversation that came up to the point, and I felt God lead me to be like, just let it go, right? Um, and so, but yeah, I know that, and just being vulnerable. There's been, especially with the whole prior to being in this relationship, the watching of pornography and, what you see on TV and stuff like that has, skewed my perception to where, sometimes, not thinking of cheating because I've never been with a woman anyway prior, at all intimately wise. But, like I was saying, the whole lusting thing and that being an issue and something that, is being worked on, that has been worked on, is still being worked on. Um, and so yeah, and we both struggle with that in a sense, right? Especially due to our past and what we've, dwelled in. But no, I definitely, it's easier said than done, right? To be like, if I was cheated on, I'd be able to forgive. But um, in God's word and in entire history, when it comes to when you read the scriptures, God always talks about his people committing adultery against him, right? And turning away from him, not staying loyal. There's actually this specific book about uh this guy named Hosea who God tells to marry this adulterous woman, and he has kids with her. She constantly, cheats on him and, is doing like wild things. And God has Hosea stay faithful, right? And God, if in scripture you see God be faithful to his people, even though they chase after false gods, even they go after their own wicked ways, he still stays faithful. And so with that example, absolutely it would be hard, and I'm human, so this makes it 10 times worse. But I know that with God's help and Lord willing, it never happens on either side, whether me or her. But I would be willing to forgive because that's what I'm called to do in all circumstances. So yeah.
All right. Do you think people should get married or not, and why? Bo?
I believe it depends on kind of the system of law. In certain countries, yes. In America nowadays, I would, I mean, if you trust the woman enough and you love her with everything, I'd say yes, but it's also a very risky event in America, more than nearly anywhere else, because if you get divorced as a man in America, you are losing significant amount of your life, may possibly up to having to pay for her for the rest of the rest of her or your life, not even including child support. Like there is some uh I wouldn't say punishments, but settlements in the divorce that make it so you have to pay for her, which I've never really understood. And like pay for her for life, 18 years, 20 years. It could be any number. It depends on the judge and circumstances, of course.
Okay.
But
Oh, I'm sorry.
the
Go ahead.
risks, oh yeah. So if we're not accounting religion, the risks outweigh the reward, because marriage is more of a, since I'm not really that religious, marriage is just a ceremony to me. It doesn't prove that I love the person I'm marrying, because only me and her would know that. So overall, from that, if I was religious, I'd kind of have to say yes or doom myself to be forever alone.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of my stance.
Um, like Bo, actually, I think it depends on the circumstance. I think that's why it's so important to be mindful about how we go about relationships, because if you get with a person for the wrong reasons and you do get married, there is the potential possibility of divorce or, you know, sticking with the marriage, but it being a very dreadful marriage. And so, that goes back to, you know, God's design for, what marriage is, and, believing, having that, the same faith, not necessarily like the same amount of years of being with, being a believer or whatever, but just believing in the same, value that, believing in Jesus Christ, believing in what he did on the cross. And I think those values are important in what it says in the word. Um, and I think like those things are important, right? Because my mom and dad were high school sweethearts. They had me when they were 19, 20. Um, and they got divorced when I was 6, right? Um, my grandma and my biological grandpa, he was 22 and she was 14. Um, weren't married at all. Ended up having my mom. He wasn't around for my mom, and I've met him one time. Um, and so and just a lot of the relationships that I've seen that weren't done in a certain way have not worked out. And I'm not saying that's every marriage, not at all, because my dad's, married now, and, he's been with my stepmom for almost 10 years. Um, so, and although, they didn't, how they went about it wasn't, in the context of how, God says in this word, they're still together, right? Um, but I think there are some difficulties that are given when we pursue relationships for the wrong reason, or we go about them in a way that we shouldn't go about them, right? And it not only has effects on the couples, but the kids. Um, and that's like generational. It's a generational thing, right? Like even my grandma, both my grandmas, they or my grandma is still married, but her and my grandpa, who isn't blood related, but who I consider my grandpa, they're still married, but aren't necessarily together, right? And then my dad's mom, she wasn't married, and she was, she had kids with, multiple men, right? And so there was no stability. Like my dad didn't grow up with his dad being around necessarily. And so there's been a lack of respect for him for a long time, until like recently. So I think like Bo said, it depends on the circumstance. So
Oh yeah, I will say I do heavily agree on whatever religion or lack of religion you have, it is important to kind of follow that. Like, if you're a Christian, you should most likely find a partner who is also Christian. Just because, a lot of troubles can, be had just by having different such different beliefs, different moral systems, different, you know.
Right, right. Having someone that aligns with your morals and principles, yeah.
Yeah, like being with someone who's Jewish and you're eating bacon and they're mad and I think it's Jewish people.
So, what do you guys think is contributing to the divorce rates? Like, do you think the divorce rates are high right now? I mean, I don't know if you guys kind of know too much about that. Do you think social media, maybe online dating and other things that has to deal with the internet contribute to maybe divorce rates, Bo?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I mean, if you're a person that's not in a financial situation, you don't even have to be evil. You can do it for bad reasons, like just divorce your husband to get money because you know you're gonna get it. You could just be in an unstable spot and want to divorce because you know he can't provide and then basically force him to provide. Because I think it's the divorce rates have been skyrocketing, I feel, because of a lack of stability generally. And the moral decay that's gone on around the world with the lack of stability. Like generally, the more stable your area is, the more you can focus on morals. We look back a lot at our forefathers, how like terrible they were, but they were in a state where you couldn't really focus on morals. It was, you had to work all day, work all night. I mean, there were terrible people, keep that in mind, but it was a lot more survival than we had now with our air conditioned rooms and all
Right.
that.
I think it's just a lack of what are the reason people are getting together and why are they getting married, right? If they're getting married for the wrong reasons, the reasons that, they got married for may be fulfilled in that time and maybe for a span of time, but whatever they did, whatever the reason was for them to get married, clearly isn't going to last forever. And they're going to be looking for the next best thing, the next person. Um, and so I think it's just that lack of self-control that we have leading up to us getting married, whether rationally or irrationally, or um, even if it's pre-planned, but the reason you got with the person was for the wrong reasons. Because having that intimacy, like having sex before marriage or having sex with multiple people, like it talks about being one flesh with one man and one woman. And so in scripture, so imagine having those multiple relationship and all that baggage with multiple people, and then you decide on this one person, but once again, your intent was wrong, but you feel like this is the person. Um, I think it's just some people aren't willing to stick with what they're with, right? And it's not just that circumstance. There could be someone who's, hasn't been in a relationship. Both sides probably weren't in a relationship, decides to get married, but I think it goes back to intention and like for me at least, I don't feel like any of the girls that I liked or anything like that ever led to a relationship or anything like that because it wasn't of God and how horribly it probably would have messed me up having a relationship like that. Just because of how I am. Like I already care a lot, already love a lot. And so to have that intimacy or have those relationships prior to actually meeting the person that I'm actually going to be with and actually going to marry would probably do a lot more damage to our relationship. Um, but because, God was faithful even before I even considered him to be in my life, because of those relationships not working out, now I'm in a relationship where we are engaged. And due to the fact that I had parents who got divorced, yes, I'm not going to act like, oh, I'm going to be better than them, and, that whole thing. But there is you know, a wanting to obey the Lord and not divorcing regardless of how hard it gets in our relationship, right? And I think with the right intentions and the right motives behind being married, I think there would be a decrease in divorces. But I think as long as our society promotes certain things and people act in their flesh and in their desires, I think it'll continue to go up, the divorce rates.
Okay.
I could also, as another part of your question about the internet, I can definitely say it can contribute to it. Specifically, like that whole there is a joke where it's you look up like you get sick, you look up your illnesses, and it just says you have 7 days to live.
Yeah.
It's it's like that with if you like you have a problem with your husband, but you don't know how to feel about it, and you turn to the internet. Just because 1,000 people or 100 people all tell you the same answer on the internet doesn't mean any of them are right. It could lead you down a terrible path,
Yeah, that's a
potentially,
Yeah,
good
or
point.
it can help
yeah,
you.
yeah. That's a good point.
Has feminism or the Me Too movement, if you are aware on that, has it changed your perspective on how women view their society or how they are being treated in the same society that you are in? Bo?
Old stage feminism, completely agreed with it. If women didn't want to be a housewife and they wanted to be independent, I can go with that. That's something, if women want to do something, they should be able to do it. But new wave feminism and Me Too, while there is good sides to every group, there is always bad sides to every group. Like I've viewed it like one of the big ones for the Me Too and feminist movement were the pay gap. And I mean, my whole thing is if there is a pay gap, you can sue companies that do that.
Wait, could you
If
elaborate
that
on what that app is?
the pay gap.
Yeah, yeah. Elaborate on that.
So there was an argument for a long time. It's kind of died out at this point, but it was that men get or women get 80 cents on the dollar that men do for the same amount of work. And they did this by using the statistic of what the average man makes in America and the average woman. But that's not fair because there are much more men billionaires than there are women but despite the data, there was still that whole argument. So they were basically calling most places, sexist, like Google's not paying me what they're paying, this guy, or Starbucks isn't. And then there was even some stuff where certain shops would charge men more. I mean, they'd get sued immediately, but they used
Wow.
to stuff like that used to happen. So it's a lot of it was anger and rage over problems that were there were definitely some good points, but a good amount of it was kind of nothing burger like because you can stir up a crowd easily and get them to cause a lot of violence or protest or any of that. Not that they were all that violent. I mean, the after George Floyd went, there was a lot of violence then, but other than that, it wasn't a whole lot of violence from a lot of those movements. I viewed it as pretty reductive, kind of like do you know most companies refuse to put vegan on any of their food, and there's a reason for it?
And why is that?
Because the associate it's not that there is no vegan food anymore, it's that the association around vegans are so bad that less people buy it just because it has the word vegan on it,
Mm.
because there's that whole stereotype of like, I mean, PETA is definitely one of the most famous of these, of like, how dare you eat animals, you're a monster, you're they'd make Hitler comparisons. I
Mm.
remember in France they would brand themselves in the streets. Like it wasn't a lot of them, but they would do that to simulate like what we did to cows.
Mm.
So a lot of people started viewing vegans as extremists, and feminists kind of went down the same road with the Me Too movement and the feminist rallies. I
Oh,
mean, people were making fun of there was vagina hats and
that I didn't know about. And what did you say it was an app?
app.
What would you say? What was that thing you just mentioned about? I forgot what you pronounced it as. Talking about the men having to pay more or whatever.
Oh, oh, those gender pay gap.
Oh, okay. I couldn't hear you
GAP.
because of the
Yeah.
audio. Okay.
It's all good.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
the gender pay gap was one of the biggest arguments, and then it kind of moved more to why women don't have certain jobs. But like the problem is women don't want certain jobs just like men don't want certain jobs. Like they were assuming oppression where choice was involved in my mind. Like I don't think it's wildly sexist that it's not mostly male nurses. Just like I don't think it's wildly sexist that most men are construction working is mostly a men dominated field. Just because something is dominated by one gender doesn't mean oppression. So I feel like originally did amazing work. Now did nothing but harm their movement. A lot of men get the police called on them or there's been men get the police called on them because they're like sitting on a park bench near the playground. They're like, "That's my kid right over there. I'm not doing anything nefarious. That's my kid."
Mm. Right.
Or if the father will have like a different like a race baby, like it'll be a white man and a black baby, and there'll be people like, "Who's that kid? Did you steal that kid? I don't think you know that kid."
Mm. Yeah, that's another good point too. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, that summarized most of what I had.
Okay, Eric.
To be honest, as he was talking, I was looking. I'm definitely not as knowledgeable on that, so I feel like what both said kind of helped me understand a little better.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, I think let me just leave it at that because I think even I need to be, or I needed to have a better understanding of it because I've done a lot less of being, I guess, the stuff that's going on, like a lot of that stuff is just not something that I intake just because of how much it is, but I think it's helpful to hear somebody's perspective on it, and to get a better understanding of it.
Now the now as far as I know, with the Me Too movement, a lot of that stemmed from women in like high profile, like, business corporations, including like the entertainment industry, were not, they felt they, they went through situations where they were uh like sexually mistreated, you know
Hmm.
like producers and films, etc. And slowly by slowly more women felt comfortable with coming out, and they were like, hey, me too, this happened to me too. And so that's how it kind of started.
Yeah, like most groups start for a good reason. Like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Feminist, they all started. I mean, even PETA probably. I haven't looked into PETA's roots, but they all started for a good cause. But when you have enough people in a group, it's going to muddy the water.
Yeah.
There's not many groups that stay as I don't know if pure is the right word, but as focused on their point.
How has, you know learning or knowing about misogyny and like the as far as the red pill movement, like, has that changed your perspective on how men view women, or how men just view their society and how they're being treated, Bo?
Yeah, that a lot of the misogyny I think is definitely hurt men a bit, where it's yes, there are misogynistic men, you could even say a good amount of them, maybe most, depending on where your stance is. But it's made a lot of men like scared of women at the same time, where they're scared to make the first move or do anything because they could get caught up. Like, for instance, let's see, there's been a good amount of people. I know it's especially frequent in high school, but can happen in basically anywhere, like fake rape allegations. Uh, Even without evidence, there's been men who've went to jail for that, and that's scared a lot of men into like more or less just permanently stonewalling. The pill movement definitely hasn't been good either because it's almost like a double combo. They move into stonewalling, and then the red pill movement grabs a lot of lonely men and like, oh, I can show you the way, just follow me. And it leads kind of back into misogyny, into like a cycle.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not healthy, nor is it because it's like they kind of like what Bo was saying, like they hunt after the vulnerable, right? And so there's this thing in scripture where it talks about, false teachers, false prophets, um, wolves dressed in sheep skin, and this whole idea of people having these certain beliefs. And I know when I was on social media and like on YouTube, how like I think it was just kind of starting and getting big, the whole red pill movement, but how extreme it was, and how those men would portray themselves, and um, how their ideology and what they valued and what was important to them. It was just all skewed, but because of who they were and how they were presenting themselves, they were put on this pedestal, right? And so I think I definitely don't think it's healthy at all, and I think it's a bad attempt to kind of like men need to heal, right? And I don't think like having this skewed perception of of what life is about is going to help that. I think it's just going to create more pride, more selfishness, and a lot more turmoil between people. So yeah.
The House, they passed a bill, or at least I know they're trying to pass a bill for men 18 to 26 to automatically be enrolled for selective service and a potential military draft. And there is consideration for women to join that as well. So, as I mentioned before, I see a lot of comments saying, kind of mocking, like, uh, feminists about how they want gender equality and stuff, and that going along with, oh, we could do anything that men can, which is one aspect of feminism, not all of it. But they're kind of mocking, like, feminists online, saying, oh, women should, all the feminists should be a part of the military selective service or draft, and should, fight in the front lines or combat, right? So what are your thoughts? That Do you think that women should be a part of the bill? Why or why not? Bo?
Well, men are already forced to sign up for the selective service to
Mm-hmm.
get our, at least in most high schools, to get our diploma. You have to enroll in that. I remember I had to do it. I mean, I'm not really grabbable because there are certain exemptions. Like, for instance, if you are the only child, I only have half brothers and sisters, so they technically, unless they change the rules, even though I'm part of selective service, they can't grab me. Um, as for that other part, I do believe that as long as you meet the requirements for the military, like, of course, give them like similar extenuating circumstances, women should be drafted too. I mean, if you're pregnant, or if I mean, pregnant is one of the big ones to add of like an exemption to it. I don't want any
Mm-hmm.
woman specifically endangering their child or anything, but I feel like it makes sense for equality's sake, and just kind of, I guess, fairness. Like, I know life's not fair, but just general fairness.
Because
There,
there was this kind of like this one meme or joke online where someone said, like, all the feminists, this will be all the feminists during, like, the draft or World War III, and it shows like a woman in the kitchen cleaning, and it's like, really.
I mean, I don't even blame that meme. I mean, I don't want to go to war. I mean, I'd rather be a house husband than go to war. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the
True.
joke is mean, yes, but like, I'd rather do that than go to war.
All right, Eric.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, right? The fact that I mean, war has always been a part of you know our society, not just this country, but
Humanity.
yeah, humanity in general, right? So I think it's it's a part of it, right? And it can be unfortunate, but it unfortunately at the same time it is what it is, and I pray that it doesn't have to come to that, but um, I also have faith that everything will work out according to God's plan, right? I don't think anything that happens in this world without, there's nothing that can happen that will go beyond God's plan, right? So when it comes to that, that's how I feel about that. And then, with the woman thing, um, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, they have the whole, wanting that equality and stuff like that. And so a circumstance like this is like, okay, if you want equality and everything, then here's this equality as well. Um, I don't think every woman would be like, no, never mind. Um, but I do see I I would I wouldn't be shocked or surprised if that, were to happen and there'd be a lot of women backpedaling on what they believed in, right? When stuff gets serious, because it's all fun and games and not to say that the other things aren't important that they want to call equality in, right? But stuff like this, when it comes to like actually our lives being at stake, and not say that it'll get that serious, but let's say it does. I think when that starts to go into play, then it's like you'll start to see, all right, I didn't really mean all of this, right? It's just specific things. So at least that's how I feel about it.
That is what happened last time.
Yeah, yeah,
Last time meaning like when women were voting for the right to, vote, and the draft thing did come up. It was other men that had to basically get rid of the draft requirement to get women to vote, like to pass at least if I remember right, to gain the ability to vote. Because just outrightly, the majority just said, "I'd rather not vote if I have to go to the military." But that was a
yeah,
previous generation that doesn't really embody what we are now.
yeah.
So it could be completely different.
You know, guys, we talked about different topics as far as going from gender equality to relationships to talking about, roles, the different roles in modern society today. But I kind of want to get to a closing here with some conclusion questions here. And my first one is, what is some advice you would give to men your age? Boo?
I'd say we're still developing. It takes until around 25 to fully get your brain all there. I know you can drink and smoke at 21 as much as you want legally, but well, depending on the state. But I definitely recommend making it a very rare thing or not at all until you're at least a bit older.
I think our spiritual lives are really important, and I think society has painted this picture where the things of this world matter more than that. And I think it's really important, um, to start to seek that out early, right? And to, um, for me, it was, um, coming to the Lord at 17 or 16, going on to 17. But I remember at a younger age, I grew up in church, stuff like that. And I remember, being in the world and being like, I'll find God later. Right now, I just kind of want to do, whatever, right? But it really is an important thing. That relationship with God is important, right? Because it affects every other area, right? And I mean, we're created in God's image, He has this plan, He has this will, and so there is purpose, right? But our definition and what we consider purpose is can be skewed, and what we seek fulfillment in can be skewed, right? And so we we get addicted to things, whether it be, drugs or um, pornography or work or whatever it may be. We can latch onto relationships and put people on pedestals, or we can be into uh worship the things that God created and turn it into something else. Um and it's just a lot of darkness, and then sometimes it's just a lack of care about that type of stuff, right? Especially if you don't grow up in it, or if you grew up in it and you had a bad experience. But I think thinking about those things is really important, especially at, around my age, 21, and even earlier than that, because I believe personally that it genuinely affects your entire life. And tomorrow isn't promised, so we don't know when our time is going to come, right? Um, and so you have to be mindful of that. And it's not to say, oh, you're, living in like this like ball where it's like, oh, I could die tomorrow. I could, die in 5 minutes, something like that. But just being aware that, you do matter and there is someone who loves you and cares for you, and there is a such thing as, um, a call or purpose, but what exactly are you leaning towards that? Like, are you leaning towards bad things? Are you leaning towards things that society holds to high regard? And if you are, then, and it's, most of, more than half of the time, it's not working out. And if it is, then there's still that hole deep within, even if you don't show it. So just keep it in mind that I think at this age is important.
Okay. And what are some goals you hope men and women can accomplish together in our society?
Um, Working together to make a sustainable world. I don't agree with most green power, but definitely some that are better than others. And if we work together, we could build a sustainable world, and a sustainable economy would be a amazing place to live.
I think it's, Jesus talks about in John 15 about, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. And I think there's a lack of love, and not just like what we see on the news and stuff, but even on our daily interactions with people, right? We can get irritated with each other fast, annoyed. Um, we can envy whatever someone else has, or be jealous, or be prideful, or not being willing to help. I think I think there's a lack of love, and I think if that perception changes, I think a lot of things will change for people, right? But you're not going, you're not going to have that without that relationship with God, right? And it goes back to what we talked about a couple of days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, and then the other day about that good and evil thing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we think that we do certain things, and that means that we're good, and because we don't do things that the world considers evil, that we're not evil, but our perception on what good and evil is skewed, right? So, I think it always goes back to God, right? And what he created us for. And I think without that understanding, I don't know if, this world is already fallen. But that doesn't mean that we have to stay stuck in the ways of the world, right? There is a way, right? Jesus is that way. Um, but people have to be willing to submit to that. So I think if we're going to have change in our society, it starts there. Now, do I think that that's what everybody's going to lean towards too? No. But I do pray that those who are predestined by him, predestined to be, or that are called by him, that they will make that change. So yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Great words from you both. Now, before we close out here, do any of you, any of you guys have any final thoughts about this conversation or any other things you would like to add in?
I don't specifically have anything.
All right. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, no, me neither. I think, I appreciate the conversation with you, Bo, and, appreciate you, Arma, for having both of us on.
Oh, no problem. Yes. But yeah, once again, I'll say it again. I always say this a lot, anyways. I want to thank you guys so much again for taking the time to share your voice because I know it's not easy to be vulnerable and just be brave enough to like share something personal where others around the world could potentially hear it. So I definitely want to thank you guys for coming on here, being yourselves, and expressing, how the way you feel. And I
Can't
just,
wait to get doxxed.
oh no,
No, no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
yeah, but I hope, yeah, I do hope you guys continue to share your voice with whatever you're passionate about. Remember that your voice always matters, because everyone has a special and unique voice. So, yes, thank you to anyone who's tuning into this. Feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you support any of my content or videos such as this. There was a lot of great, amazing things said here. And yeah, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you next time in the next one. Take care.